On this Friday night, the United Kingdom's search for stability. Britain's Conservative Party looks to stop the revolving door as it searches for a new leader.
The Tory party has to settle down and get on with delivering its mandate.
Plus, the outrage over the outgoing PM's hefty parting gift. Ottawa's national handgun sales ban kicks in, but is it really helping? Ordered to testify. The January 6th committee demands Donald Trump's appearance. How the sentencing of a former aide shows the risk to the former U.S. president for not showing up. And supporting grieving parents. Nova Scotia's plan to help those experiencing pregnancy loss.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. The race for Prime Minister in the UK is on again. The musical chairs game at 10 Downing Street means the British people are poised to have their third Prime Minister in 2 months, or the world could witness political whiplash. Boris Johnson left office just 6 weeks ago. He was forced out by his own party after a series of scandals. He's said to be flying back to London after a post-resignation holiday. Though he hasn't declared his intention to become Conservative leader again, dozens of MPs are already throwing their weight behind him. And if he does run, he'll likely end up in a heated battle with his rival and former Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak. Candidates have until Monday to formally announce a run. And as our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Goomansingh reports, the first one put her name in the race late this afternoon.
What a difference a week makes.
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable.
Since Monday, Penny Mordaunt, who uttered that famous phrase, has gone from Liz Truss' defender to a would-be successor. The government House leader and former Defence Secretary is the first to declare for the UK's top job, calling herself a fresh start to unite the party. Now she needs 100 MPs to endorse her. Her PM for PM leadership bid this past summer fell short, missing the final ballot by 8 votes.
Well, I think the Tory party has to settle down and get on with delivering its mandate.
Wise words from Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, but he doesn't want a new job. He's leaning towards a familiar name, Boris Johnson.
This will be potentially our third Prime Minister since the general election of 2019. That means we have to think about that legitimacy question that the public will be asking themselves, and also about who could win the next election.
Johnson may be a vote winner, but he is not a unifying character.
This is it, folks.
His departure from number 10 in July was the result of deep divides, with a record number of MPs resigning. One of those who stepped down was Rishi Sunak, another name being floated as a possible candidate.
We've got to get away from this idea that the sort of revolving door of chaos.
The Labour leader is also one of the loudest voices demanding Britain's shortest-serving Prime Minister forego her annual entitlement. The public duty costs allowance given to British Prime Ministers adds up to roughly $176,000 Canadian. It's a unique payment, and there's nothing similar in Canada. Prime Ministers, as members of Parliament, can collect a pension, but the Canadian leaders have to serve at least 4 years.
People across the UK are facing the cost of living crisis, and it was the number one issue the now outgoing Prime Minister was supposed to address. The new leader will have to deal with it immediately as the government is set to unveil its fiscal plan at the end of the month. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
And you can bet Canadian politicians are taking note of what's unfolding in the UK. On the provincial front, we saw some big promises today from BC's premier-designate, David Ebys, who has laid out his plan for his first 100 days in office. Today's announcement comes after a controversial leadership race that saw his only opponent ultimately disqualified. Let's go now to BC Legislative Bureau Chief Keith Baldrey for the latest on this. Keith, Ebys says he has plans to improve housing, affordability, public safety, even healthcare in the next 3 months.
Yeah, some pretty ambitious plans, but again, no details today. Basically, some broad-based themes, as you mentioned. Key issues in British Columbia, chief among them, crime, housing, and affordability, cost of living. David Ebys, again, not many details, but today displaying a fair amount of enthusiasm, wanting to get back into the job as soon as possible. Here's Mr. Ebys.
I am so excited about the work that I'm able to do with our amazing team in the legislature, with British Columbians across the province, with First Nations governments, with local governments, with the national government, with business leaders, nonprofits, service providers, with labor, with employers, all of us together. That's the only way we can deal with these huge challenges we face. I can't wait to get started.
So transition begins in earnest starting next week. Mr. Ebys will meet with his government caucus for the first time Monday afternoon, name his new chief of staff, begin ministerial briefings. He won't become premier, though, in terms of being sworn in, likely until the second week of November.
Keith Baldrey in Victoria. Thank you, Keith. There may be a new premier in Alberta, but the announcement of a new cabinet today suggests more of the same in the legislature. Premier Danielle Smith has some key ministers staying in place, including the ministers of Health, Justice and Education. She also appointed two of her rivals for the United Conservative leadership, Travis Taves and Brian Jean. Together, the new cabinet is made up of 26 men and 4 women. They'll be sworn in on Monday. Alberta's government is ramping up the political battle with Ottawa. Mounties there are being told not to take part in the federal government's firearms buyback program. This as the Prime Minister declared Canadians will be safer due to the national freeze on the sale, purchase and transfer of handguns that went into effect today. Abigail Bimman takes a look at the policy versus the politics.
Prominent Liberal ministers in Canada's 3 biggest cities Friday, cities where the government has voter support and which grapple with gun violence.
It's very tiring and going to funeral after funeral after funerals.
Liberals re-announcing their handgun freeze, now officially in effect.
It is no longer legal to buy, sell, or transfer a handgun.
This is what a comprehensive strategy looks like.
Why are we taking this decision? Because we've seen gun crime go up.
It's going to have no impact on gun violence in the short term. Over the long term, it may have some impact on limiting the number of guns available to be stolen or misused.
While there is, of course, disagreement, many experts say not enough focus or dollars are spent on reducing risk factors instead.
It's not very attractive as politics to talk about however many $1 million you're going to devote to the CBSA. This is kind of boring. So you make a big sexy announcement like, oh, we are putting a freeze on the sale of handguns in Canada, and suddenly it seems like you did something, even if you really didn't.
I think you have to look no further than the last election to see that the Liberals clearly use firearms as political wedge.
And you may have noticed Justin Trudeau is now up against a new opposition leader.
They are trying to box in any possibility that Poilievre gains traction in more urban ridings, because that's going to be what makes the difference possibly between whether it's a Liberal win in the next election or a Conservative win.
But the Prime Minister accuses some provinces of playing politics instead, like those pushing back on the Liberals' years-old promise for a gun buyback program.
Unfortunately, we see Conservative premiers trying to play the worst kinds of politics.
The handgun freeze comes alongside the broader Bill C-21 on gun control. That's still being studied by Parliament. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
The commission reviewing the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act last winter has finished its first full week of hearings, with a heavy focus on the police response to the occupation of downtown Ottawa by protesters. Our David Aiken joins us now with more on what Ontario police are categorizing as failures from officers in Ottawa.
Well, Farah, if this week's hearings have made anything clear, it is that the Ottawa police response to the convoy was dysfunctional to the point of incompetence.
In his 36-year career with the Ontario Provincial Police, Carson Party always thought the Ottawa Police was top shelf when it came to dealing with protests and major events.
First class.
But that opinion changed when Party was dispatched in February to Ottawa to help solve the convoy problem.
I asked the question, what's going on? What happened to you guys? And certainly the pandemic has had an impact, retirements, people moved on.
The big problem, Ottawa's police chief at the time, Peter Slowly.
Very antagonistic. It was disrespectful in terms of we're there to help, and he's just not trusting it. It was very clear he had confidence issues in what we were there to do.
But if the dysfunction of Ottawa's municipal force was one of the reasons the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act, a lawyer for the government of Saskatchewan, which opposed the use of the act, tried to establish that the provincial force had full authority on their own to arrest people inside city limits and remove the blockade.
So it follows that OPP officers have not required the provincial or federal Emergency Act to be invoked to have those powers then, is that correct?
Correct. Their powers under the Criminal Code and the Highway Traffic Act.
And to put a bow on a week when the Ottawa Police Service has been under intense scrutiny, the independent Ottawa Police Services Board made a controversial decision to name the next police chief today. Controversial because a new mayor and council will be elected Monday. In any event, that new chief comes from the RCMP. His name is Eric Stubbs, and it sounds like he'll have plenty of work to do. Farah.
Certainly. David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David. The January 6th committee subpoenas Donald Trump. Coming up, what the sentencing of a former advisor could mean for Trump's future. Plus, searching for names, a look inside the meticulous work being done to identify unmarked graves.
Saturday on The New Reality. Gone, but not forgotten.
Who is she? Where did she go?
Inside the painstaking detective work to identify the lost Indigenous children.
It's a fundamental human right.
The New Reality. Saturday at 7 on Global.
To developing news out of the U.S. now, where former President Donald Trump has been subpoenaed by the House Select Committee investigating the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Our Jackson Prosco joins me now from Washington with the very latest. Jackson, this seems like a major turning point. What exactly, though, does it mean for Trump?
Farah, the committee wants Trump to sit for one or more days of testimony in the next few weeks. What's critical here is the language in the formal subpoena delivered to Trump. The committee makes it clear they believe Trump was at the center of the events of January 6th and potentially efforts to interfere with the investigation after. They write, "We have assembled overwhelming evidence, including from dozens of your former appointees and staff, that you personally orchestrated and oversaw a multi-part effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election and to obstruct the peaceful transition of power." Among the records the committee wants are any messages Trump sent through the encrypted Signal messaging app and any calls or text messages from January 6th, along with any communications related to possible witnesses. Now, you may be wondering if these subpoenas have any sort of teeth, and the answer was made abundantly clear today when former Trump advisor Steve Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison and a fine for contempt of Congress, all for his refusal to cooperate with a similar subpoena from the committee. Now, Bannon remains free pending the results of an appeal, and he was defiant outside the court.
November 8th, there's going to have judgment on the illegitimate Biden regime, and quite frankly, the Nancy Pelosi and the entire committee.
Now, going back to Trump, there's a very real possibility that we end up in a long legal fight over whether or not the former president can be compelled to testify and cooperate. And it's not inconceivable that such a fight extends well into the new year and past the point at which the January 6th committee has been formally disbanded following November's midterm elections. Farah?
Jackson Prosco in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. Giorgia Meloni has been appointed Italy's first female prime minister. Meloni, who heads the far-right Brothers of Italy party, will lead a coalition of conservative parties which together won a landslide in September's snap election. She and her government will be sworn in on Saturday as Italy's first far-right government since the Second World War. But that coalition is already facing challenges, with Meloni criticizing one of her partners, former PM Silvio Berlusconi, after recordings were made public of him gushing about his close relationship with Vladimir Putin and appearing to blame Ukraine for Russia's invasion. A huge dam in Ukraine's south has become the latest focus in the conflict there. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have planted explosives inside the huge Novakakova Dam, and they're planning to blow it up. Breaching the dam would send a huge wall of water flooding land downstream, including much of the city of Kherson, which Ukrainian forces hope to recapture in a major advance. Zelensky says blowing up the dam would be akin to the use of weapons of mass destruction. And with Russian attacks on Ukraine's power infrastructure continuing, hospitals and other institutions are putting plans in place to keep running without electricity. And this hospital in Kyiv has backup generators, fuel and battery packs stockpiled, along with lots of flashlights and candles. Despite the enormous impact on civilians, Russia's defense ministry says the goal of its strikes against Ukraine's energy infrastructure is to degrade the country's military. Recognizing pregnancy loss ahead, how one province is expanding bereavement leave. There's a victory in recognizing a trauma that's traditionally been ignored in Canada. And it comes from Nova Scotia, where the government there is putting partisanship aside to make changes to the province's labor laws to better support women and their partners following miscarriages or babies born still. Ross Lord spoke with the bereaved parents whose terrible loss inspired this legislation.
As an ordeal that's traditionally discussed only in private, pregnancy loss has never been included in Nova Scotia workplace bereavement leave. That's about to change.
I'm thankful we've been able to look beyond partisanship towards the greater good and to find ways to better support parents.
A victory for Laura Lee Nichols' private member's bill that was motivated by her own daughter, Elizabeth, who endured pregnancy loss at 32 weeks. A baby born still, she and her husband named Ruby.
Don't know if I emotionally could have pretended that she did not exist, because she very much existed, and I loved her, I love her, and she'll always be my daughter.
An amended labor law will allow people who experience a sudden end to a pregnancy at least 5 consecutive days of unpaid leave, although that could be changed to paid time off.
It's changing what it means to be a bereaved parent.
Employees would also have protection against losing their jobs. Several other provinces and the federal government already offer some leave provisions. As they work to ease the pain of others, Elizabeth and Stephen Cushing's lives have swung from sorrow to celebration. Their 14-month-old twin daughters, Marigold and Edith.
I think, especially after everything that we've gone through, it kind of makes you appreciate more the little moments, I suppose, with the girls.
On the stairwell here, we have pictures of Ruby. We have pictures of Ruby upstairs. I think that helps us to see her, because she was beautiful and she looks just like the twins, which is pretty amazing.
This time of year is always somewhat challenging because Ruby was born on November 7th, so her second birthday is coming up.
With an estimated 3,000 stillbirths every year in Canada, advocating for other parents is making a difference.
I suppose it shows the power of telling your story. You never really know what will come out of it, but this has been a wonderful outcome that really we didn't foresee, but we're very thankful for it.
The changes would come into effect in January, a critical step toward bereavement in order to heal. Ross Lord, Global News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
The deaths of hundreds of children in 2 countries are being blamed on tainted cough syrup. At least 66 kids in the West African nation of the Gambia and 99 children in Indonesia have died of acute kidney failure. The deaths have all been linked to cough syrups manufactured in India by Maiden Pharmaceuticals and exported across the developing world under a number of different brand names. Tests of the products have found unacceptable amounts of 2 dangerous chemicals. While production has now been halted, recalling the medicines is a big challenge. Children who never returned home next. The work to determine their names. There is a quiet but incredibly important effort underway in this country to uncover the identities of Indigenous children who may be buried in unmarked graves at or near former residential schools. This week on The New Reality, Krista Hesse takes us inside one community's search for the names of students believed to have died at a residential school in southern Manitoba.
I'm here at the United Church's archives in Winnipeg. These boxes hold precious details, clues that are vital to so many First Nation communities, the identities of who is likely buried in the unmarked graves being discovered at former residential school sites.
Catherine Nichols has spent countless months sifting through records, looking for any mention of a child being injured, ill, or dead. She's a bioarchaeologist, working alongside Sioux Valley Dakota Nation to uncover the names of children who died at Brandon Residential School.
Communities need to know where their children are. It's a fundamental human right.
The work is onerous, not only because records are incomplete, if they exist at all, but also because students were often referred to by numbers rather than their names. Others were given Western names in an effort to erase children's Indigenous identities.
When we do come across instances of children's names, essentially what we want to do is make a case file for that child and try and find out as much information as we can.
She's been able to confirm the identities of 99 students who never returned home. But the work is far from over.
The documents get researchers close, but finding out who's buried in each grave is even more complicated. For that, researchers will need to exhume and test the remains for DNA. Back to you.
Krista will have a behind-the-scenes look at this detective work tomorrow on The New Reality. That's at 7 p.m. right here on Global. And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Carburn Park in Calgary. We love seeing Your Canada, so please keep emailing us those photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.